Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Low Code Cafe, number 18. We've been doing this for a while, and for the past 8 editions, we've been building this marketing system. And today we'll continue building on that and adding some kind of SMS automation with embedded forms into SMSs, which is a very, very interesting use case and easy to achieve with Plant an App. But before that, let me also give you a brief overview for those of you that are new to this webinar. We are doing it every week, and it's a technical community event. So we do a lot of demoing feature and hands-on development. This session is recorded as well as all previous webinars. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll find all of them there. Make sure to subscribe and stay updated because there's maybe 2-3 videos that we post every week. And before moving to the agenda, I wanted to reiterate on the bigger things that we are doing right now. So just for a second, I will share the Republic campaign, so the equity crowdfunding campaign that we announced a couple of weeks ago. And so far, it's a good success. We are currently at 80K and from 200 investors. Some of these are folks from our community. So thanks everyone for supporting us, for investing in our shared future. So it's going very well, but also it's a very good growth tool because some of these investors get in touch with us to discuss about using Plant an App in their projects. Like we get to discuss with enterprise architects that otherwise it would be difficult to get to. So I think this is a very, very good success so far. And there's another thing that we'll do today. So based on the feedback that we received from participants in the previous sessions, seems that I'm not so good at moderating the technical parts because probably I know too much in my head, and I'm too much in my head. So what we are going to try from now on is have Dale moderate the technical session so he can stop Radu, for example, ask the proper questions. So then participants in this webinar, you can get a better feeling of what Radu is doing. So usually the agenda is about the same. We are doing these community updates that I just announced, and then we'll get to see some lessons learned from the support channel by Dale that runs our support right now. And then we'll get to see some product updates, what's coming. And finally, the biggest part of this event is we get to see Radu building systems using the Plant an App features. So that's it on my part. Feel free to engage with us on chat, on Q&A, on voice. Everything is allowed. So that's it on my part. Now I invite Dale to take over to show us what's happening on support, but also continue the rest of the webinar. So Dale.
Great, thank you. And I will share my screen here in just a second. I think if I interpret what you said, you know it, and since I don't, I can ask good questions. Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah. You have the perspective much more evolved than I have. Being inside for so long, I'm biased.
Okay. So from the trenches this week, there's a couple of things I'm going to mention. One is that on the low code feature focused, that playlist, we've added 2 more videos in this last week, I think one by Patrick, one by me. And so again, I just urge you to follow that playlist, and I'll post the link to that when I'm not talking. And the topic that I wanted to cover today is somewhat of an advanced topic, dynamic forms, and it's going to serve as an introduction to what Radu is going to do in a little while. But this is just an interesting one to me. The use case is this is something that you use when your form needs to prompt for fields, but that you don't know what they are at design time, right? It's going to be something that's data driven, like you're going to ask different questions of different users. Or if you, in the case of a marketing campaign, you might have different questions for different campaigns. So there's this need to ask different questions, and the form can't be a static form in the way that we normally do one. So we're going to use dynamic forms. And this is kind of interesting, just from a low code standpoint. It's a little bit of an advanced topic, but it's a 10 times savings or more against traditional development. So I hope you see that when as we go through that. If you want to look at, I'll post this link as well, but this is documented in our documentation center, dynamic fields, and so I'll have the link to that. But let's see what this looks like. So I have a entity defined called questions, and I have put in 4 questions about geography. And so we have it relates to geography. It's a question, 4 different questions, and then whether or not I want these included in my form. So I have 2 that are being included and 2 that are not. And I have a demo form all built. We're going to build this in our here in just a second, but I'll show you where we're going before we go there. So it's asking the 2 questions. If we go back to the questions and, for example, change one of these that are false, and we'll just change it to say to include it in our data. Then when we go to the form and answer questions, now we have 3 questions. So this is showing that it's dynamic, and it's also dynamic in the submit, how we process it. But we'll get into that. So let's go through the steps that would be necessary to build something like this. And on my form, I have a manage form that I've dropped, an action form that I've dropped on the screen, but I haven't done anything with it yet. So we're going to go into manage it, and it's going to be we're just going to start with a blank form. It's called dynamic form. And we're all familiar with the way that you might add a form field. Normally, you would come in and say add field and text field and add it, and that would be the traditional way of designing it. But in our case, we want to do it dynamically. So we're going to look under, I'm sorry, here in hidden data, there's this thing called a dynamic field container. This is the thing that you drop on, and this is where we're going to put our questions. They're going to appear within this container. And I am just going to rename this to be the questions FC, questions field container. That's it for defining the questions. The way to kind of hard code, okay, I'm just going to illustrate how we would add something into that container. If we go into dynamic fields and say that we want to add a text box into the dynamic field, it's going to prompt us through the questions, through the, what is this text box going to look like? So everything has to have a field ID. It has to go into a container. So I'm going to use that same container that we just dropped on, and I'm going to create something called field 1. Just like every other field that you add manually, it has to be defined as it has to have its own name. And then I'm just going to ask the question, how old are you? And I'm going to make this, if we keep scrolling down, there's still a place to make it be a required field. So I'm going to say true, it's a required field. And all this has been put into the on init section of my form. So when this form loads, it's going to insert that field into the form. So let's go and see what we've got so far. And what we have so far is an error. Specified field container was not found. So let's see if I can fix my problems. So it's question FC. I probably had the wrong thing. So in my init, make sure that I had questions FC. So it has to match. So we save that and refresh the form. And now we get the question, how old are you, added into the form. So that's the relatively easy part. We have what we've really done is added in code, we've added a single question. But now we kind of move on to the hard part, which is that we want to add it by using the data out of the data table instead of adding it manually. So we'll go into our on init and remove that. We're not going to use that one. And instead, we're going to do the few steps of code that would add our questions dynamically. So there's a feature here that I've just discovered the other day. I'm always finding something new in the product. Execute actions, where we can put a stack of things, a stack of actions inside of one action, which is really cool because, for example, you can conditionalize that whole stack one time. I'm using this because I'm going to reuse, I'm going to transport it using import and export here in a little while, but this is just going to let us put all of our actions in one place. So since we're going to make this be related to the database, we need to do two things, basically. We need to read the questions from the database, and then we need to put them on the form. So that's going to be done in 3 actions. So the first one is going to use the read all questions action. And we want to, that's reading our entity of questions. And I'm going to add a where clause, and the where clause is going to be include equal 1. We could be more complex with this, but I'm just going to say include equal 1, which is that include flag. So, and then I'm not going to do it in any particular order, but the output token for this is going to be questions read, questions read. So this is going to get our questions in, and then there's a hint here that's useful. It says that the output can be used in subsequent actions, for example, load entities JSON, and that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to do a load entities JSON, and this is going to turn what we've read into entities that we can then iterate through. We can loop through them. So the JSON model is going to be questions read. And the entity name that we're going to create is going to be called the Q entity list. So these 2 steps have gotten us an entity that we can loop through. So our next action is going to be execute on an entity list, and the entity that we're going to work through is called questions read, and I'm going to make a choice here about updating the tokens. We don't really need that in this one, but the actions that we're going to do is really that same thing, the dynamic fields. We want to add a text box, and so we're going to work through that same dialogue, but now it's going to be dynamic, where we're going to say where it's going to go, and I'm going to avoid problems. I'm going to copy and paste my the ID of my container. So the container ID here, the field ID, everything has to have a unique field ID. So I'm going to call this field, and then I'm going to use the entity to do the QENT list. I'm going to just use the ID. So the field name is going to be field 1, field 2, field 3, something like that. And the field title is going to be the question that comes out of my database. We're still going to make this a required field. And that's it. So if we save this and refresh the screen, we have the error.
Dale, I think the entity name is not correct there.
Okay. So we created QEnt list.
Yes, and I think you are using a different entity name. At the top, just scroll a little bit more at the top. in the execute actions on entity list action, you are specifying a wrong entity name. That's
Thank
one.
you. Yep.
But can you scroll a little bit up again? Because I think the error that you're encountering is because the question read the JSON model, it has to have a column JSON or something like that.
Perfect.
You can check the help text in the riddle question. I'm not sure if it's JSON or something else. It's JSON. Okay, cool.
Yep. So thank you for that. Let's see if we get it now. So perfect. So now we have all our questions. So there's a whole extra section of this, and I'll do it as part of a feature focus video going forward, where we add the button and interpret the fields. I don't want to chew up all of our time today, but again, going through simple steps. We read the database, turn it into an entity list, and then use those each entity to insert question after question after question onto the form, and the form can be dynamic. And this one, is dynamic too. If we were to go back to our question list and take this and include the fourth question, when we now go to our new form, it adds the fourth question. So made a dynamic list. And that's really as far as I wanted to get today. I don't want to chew up all the time, but I hope you find that valuable, and just as a demonstration of the power of low code. And I think I'm going to throw this to back to you, Bogdan.
Thank you. Yes, wonderful things, and we'll get to see Radu doing a lot of things with it today to embed those forms in the SMS messages. So let's see, give me a second to see if we have Reza with us. Okay, you are there.
I am here. Hey everyone, just want to give a quick update today on the current release we're working on, 1.10. We were going to have the release candidate available this week. We've pushed everything out 1 week. We've got a lot going on in this release, some pretty major new features that kind of impact everything, in particular the one-click license activation, as well as some big changes to what you know as Action Grid or the listing feature in App Builder. And so there's that calendar template, some additional things there, but that's all built in onto the existing framework. So just a lot of testing and things that we want to make sure we get right and don't introduce any breaking changes out. There's the new skin coming. By default, your existing skin and app will stay in place, but you'll have an ability to pick the other skin if you want to try it out and see if a horizontal navigation bar works better for you. If you have a very data heavy and field heavy application, giving that real estate back so that you can maximize the full width of the user's screen. Also, I wanted to just let you all know that we're aware of the DNN 9.8 that's imminently coming out. They had published a release candidate 2 about a week ago. Usually what happens if there's no issues in those release candidates is about a week later, they'll go ahead and drop that. So we're anticipating that to probably be coming out as early as next week. And so far we've been testing ahead on that with the release candidates. Haven't found any issues yet. I don't want to sign off and say 100% fully compatible there. There's a lot of things to test, but so far so good. And I don't anticipate any issues there. If we run into anything in our testing, we'll make sure that we get those taken care of so that when that new version of DNN drops, where you're able to just hit the ground running and shouldn't encounter anything there. And so overall, then the release candidate should be available to people who really need it for something or just need to be a little bit bleeding edge, try something out. We've got several users that have been working with us, kind of doing some client testing out ahead in their instances. So the release candidate will be officially available next week. And then the week of 11.9, we'll have the stable and the properly published release, which you'll be able to access then in the updates section of App Builder, and it'll be that one-click upgrade. And so that's it for this week. Just we're hard at it, and it's a good release, a lot of features, things are looking good, just making sure that we've got everything tested really well.
Great. Yeah. Looking forward to see this new release as well. Let's see, do we have any questions? We don't have any questions, so feel free to ask us, stop us. There will also be the feedback forms that's coming after the webinar. Feel free to just write us an email. And I know Reza is preparing something on the community portal to be a better place to collect feedback ideas in a more structured way than throwing them all over the place. So that will be a nice addition to determining how our backlog goes when it's inspired by what our users experience every day. Cool. So now we are moving onwards to the hands-on part. So Radu and Dale, if you'd like to take over, and let's spam someone today.
Hello. All right. So, hi everyone. Welcome back to the low-code Café plant and app instance. So, as Dale and Bogdan already introduced, yes, we are gonna do some dynamic fields, and we are gonna dynamic forms actually, and those forms we are gonna send over SMSs for people to fill in. A little bit of preparation that I did before this. I think in the last episodes we already sent some SMSs. So I prepared this part of sending the SMSs. The main addition was that I added a new phone column to our contacts, and I'm preparing to send an SMS with the a response form when we're gonna get there to this specific contact, and this specific contact can fill in the dynamic form, and after that we can see the responses from them. The first things first, we are gonna need a structure. It's gonna contain, I think, only 3 entities where we can store our dynamic forms information, like what are the questions, what are the question types, what are the response forms, and I think we are going to need a 4th one for storing the actual results. But before we get to the results, let's start with configuring the entities for the entities for storing the settings on generating the dynamic form. So getting back to the 3 main entities that I saw. So the first one, it will be we are gonna need one which is called response form, which is basically gonna save us. Let us save how many dynamic forms we are gonna have. So each time we are gonna send a new one to a specific contact, we can say we want a feedback form, or we want a whatever form we are gonna decide on building with. The second entity is gonna be the questions that are going to appear in those response forms, and also a third one that is going to define each question, what type is this, like text box, large text, checkboxes, drop down, and so on. So talking about the question types, I'm going to start with that one. Let's say question type and question types. Okay. The properties. So those for the moment are just gonna contain one column, and that's gonna be name. Nothing very complicated with this one. I think the next one that we are gonna build, which is gonna be the question itself, can contain more information. So people who worked with Plant and App until now, they know the fact that the form fields from our products have multiple properties. So for example, you're gonna have the name of the questions, or basically the text of the questions. Let's name it like this. And after that, well, the question, and now that you have the text, maybe we can define what type it is. So let's go and say type. Type. And this can be of type question type. After that, so keep in mind, so let's put it this way. Text boxes, you can write free text, but there are but checkboxes or dropdowns, you have to specify different options for people to choose. So in this specific situation, if we use anything else than text boxes, we are going to have to also specify what are the items inside the the field itself.
The information you're going to need to initialize to put it up there on the form.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we are doing we are building an entity that is generic for all the questions. I understand that the text box and the large text or other fields do not have this options property, but we are going to add it here just so we have it for the one that have multiple options for responses. And I saw, Dale, that in your example you had the is required option, which we can add really quickly as a boolean, and well, is enabled. I saw that you had also in your example, so why not add it also here as a boolean. Another thing that we can do, and I find it very easy in those situations, is for us when defining the question to also specify the ID of the question. So Dale, you are composing the ID of the questions based on the ID number. Another option it can be to have the ID specified here.
Absolutely. I think that's a better option. Mine was just kind of the quick and dirty. So, yep.
Okay. To be honest, in my work, I'm using both of them. But I think it's just much easier for us in this example if we specify the field ID. Okay, let me click save on this one. And the last one, it will be to specify the response. Oh my God. Okay, response form. The response forms. And for the moment, those are going to be just a name. And when we are going to start defining everything, all the properties and the question, I think this is going to have a little bit more sense for everyone. Why I'm just doing the name. It may have also, let's say, a description. And you can expand this depending on your necessities in your business logic. Let's make this a large text and save. One thing that I missed on my response forms. I am so sorry. The response form needs to have questions. So this is just the definition. So let's say questions here, and the questions need to be a list of questions. My bad. Okay. All right. So let's before we get to the dynamic generation, let's just go for the moment and specify some question types. And Dale, if you want, we know we have the text box. We have the large text. We also have dropdowns, sorry. And let's make another one, checkboxes. All right, we can, I think in your example, people saw there are, I don't know, around 12, 14 dynamic fields that you can add. I'm just going to define some of them, and I'm just going to move after this in defining some of the questions. And let's go and add some questions. So how old are you? It's going to be a text box in this situation, or should we make it a drop down?
I think text box is good.
Okay, a text. Oops, My bad. How old are you? And I'm gonna make it a text box. So keep in mind, a text box doesn't have options. You can only have free text. And I'm just gonna say it's required and enable. And let's say the field ID is how old. And I'm just gonna add this one. Let's add another one. Any ideas? Are you married? Oops.
That's a good one.
And let's have, well, this one should be, normally this is a radio option, but I'm gonna use the dropdown and I'm gonna say yes and no. And I'm gonna put the options on different, lines. And also, again, well, the ID can be like this. As I think it's fine. Are you married? All right, and let's add another one, and we can after that define the. What options do we still have? Please give us more details. And let's make this a large text box. Again, the text box doesn't have options, required, enable, and we can name these more details. Okay. So those are going to be the questions that we defined really quickly here, and after that we can go and define a response form itself. So I'm just gonna have a response form, and it's gonna be generic questions. Maybe the description can be the same. And now I can go to the questions, and well, I can add other questions if I want. Otherwise, I can just choose from the one that I already defined. So both options are you can use both options without a problem. So now I hope it starts to make a little bit more sense. So we have a response form, which is called generic questions, and this generic questions response form has 3 questions, and we specify the type of each individual questions, the options in case they have, if it's required, or if it's required, a field ID, and I'm going to show you later where we can use this, and if it's an enable questions, or yes or no. All right. First things first. So as the title described, we are going to need to send an SMS to someone asking them to fill in this generic form. So in doing that, remember I already did some preparation here on the contact form. The only thing that I didn't have at that point, I don't know what are my response forms that I want to send. So we're gonna come here right now and do some adjustments. For example, the first adjustment that I'm going to do is that the values of the response form dropdown need to be brought from a SQL query. So in this situation, I can just go and say select ID as value and name as text from app.response form. So remember, all the entities that we have you generate in the system also create a physical table in the SQL server that you can we put those tables under the app schema, so you can access the columns and the information from them directly with SQL query. So this can help you provide more power to your app. All right, so now that we are interested actually in this ID when sending the SMS. So now that we have this, I'm gonna go to the send button below, and what I did here is I created a workflow that it's using the Twilio integration that we have, the Twilio connector that we have to send an SMS. I already configured that. If you don't know how to do that, I recommend you to check the past episodes. But for the moment being, I just want the idea is that I want to send an SMS to the phone of the specific contact. The token that you're seeing here, URL domain, is actually what you are seeing here in the browser, including the HTTP or an HTTPS. And this is very useful when we are planning on developing on one of the instances. And after migrating to the live one, this is going to adapt basically based on the URL that you are using the platform on. So you don't need to have switches or anything like that. It's automatically adapting. And you have to specify a page, basically the URL itself. The contact ID already have, and the response form token I already have here. I think the only thing that I didn't do yet is create the new page where we are actually going to build the dynamic form. So I'm not going to name it response form because I think this is already taken by the entity automatically generating that page. So if you have, let's say, take response form, let's say something like a dynamic response form, and we can change this URL and the page name. I'm just lacking ideas right now. Okay, and let me save this really quickly. And let's send me an well, maybe the natural thing to be is to actually create the page first. So let's go add a new page, dynamic response form. It's in menu. I think we are going to need to make this public just so we can access it. Anyone can access it. So it's dynamic minus response minus form. So this means I need to go back, my bad, and update the URL from that SMS. Okay.
So while you're doing that, I'll just mention we have a question if the app SQL schema name is configurable, and I think it's not.
Yep. At this point, no, it's app and it's not configurable. But that doesn't mean we cannot in the future.
Yeah, this is Reza. So this year still, that the whole entity building and external data sources, existing tables, being able to define the schema, that's going to be tackled in the next release that we're getting ready to start next week. So hoping to have some good forward progress this year still, and that will probably be our kind of closeout release of the year, is some big enhancements and being able to tap into other data sources as well as take some control over defining where things go. So it's coming.
Thanks, Reza.
Thank you. Okay, so I modified the URL in the SMS that I'm going to send. What I did, I click on send response form. I choose one of the response forms that I generated. Well, I only have one, the generic one, and I'm just going to click send. And right now, hopefully on my phone or, on the Google Messages, I should get a new SMS with my URL. Okay, I got it. Please fill in response form here. I can click on the URL and I'm gonna be redirected to that new page that I created with the client ID. So I know when I get this URL, I actually know who I asked to fill in the form and what's the response form ID. So this is gonna help me get the settings of the.
That's how you'll link. That's how you'll link to the questions.
Yep, exactly. There are other options to identify the client. Maybe just adding the ID directly in the URL is not the most secure way, but I'm just trying to get this working, and improvements can be added at any point. Okay, so now let's add the form, the action form here, and drag it in the proper container. And let's manage the form. So the first thing first is going to be exactly what Dale did also about the dynamic container. I'm sorry. So we are going to need to add the dynamic container, and just to keep question FC, just to make for people easier to understand and link to what Dale did, I'm just going to name my dynamic container the same, but feel free to name it how it makes the most sense for you. And the only other field that we're going to add from here is going to be the button, the save button, or submit button. But we're going to come to this button later. for the moment, we are gonna focus our attention to the pre-init part. In the on the init part, where we are gonna basically create our mechanism to add fields dynamically based on the settings that we just defined. So one of the first thing that we need to do is to get access, not access, but create a query, a SQL query that when we specify the form, the response form, it's gonna bring back the questions that we need to add dynamically. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do a load the entities from SQL. Right, and for this part, I'm gonna ask some help from my good old friend SQL management, so I can write this query easily. Let me refresh this really quickly. So we have the new tables that I have, the question type, and the response form here. So I need to do, then let's make it simple. I need to select all from that question. So in this situation, those are going to be the questions, and these are going to be the settings that I have. But I'm not interested in all the questions. I'm only interested in the ones that actually are on for that specific response form, and that has the ID 1. So in this situation, I'm going to inner join with the app.response form rf on rf dot well, I have an intermediate one now that I think about it. So before we get there, I think we need to go to inner join the app dot response form questions. This is going to be the one that enable us to have multiple questions to a response form, and also some of the questions to be assigned to different response forms. So this structure enables us to have more power in how we define. And this is, someone asked me at some time, but isn't this more complicated than doing, a one-to-many relationship? And I asked, that's my simple answer was at that point, well, yes, but it's more powerful on reporting. If you want to ask in every form, how old are you? It's just gonna give you a more sense of what your audience is in those specific questions. So yes, it may be a little bit more complicated, but I think the good side of this is that it's bringing more reporting capabilities. Okay, let me get really quick back. So question ID equals to the question ID, and now I need to join with the response form ID on rfqq dot wait a second, equals response form ID. And also what we are going to need to do is to identify for each individual question. Maybe the ID, where is it? The type, it's good enough in some situation, but just for this example, what I'm going to like to do is also bring the question type name qt dot id equals on the q. Okay, qt on question type. Right. So if I run this, we're going to have a lot of columns, but I'm not interested in all of them. I'm just interested in the question ID in this situation. Well, I'm interested in everything that the question has actually. So let's go in question dot star. And I'm also interested in the question type name. And we need to add the where clause, where the response form ID, my bad, ID equals 1. And we have this. So this is the information that we need, the minimum, let's say the minimum information that we need for in this situation to generate the
dynamic form.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think your point a little while ago, it makes sense. if you're designing something simple, then this level of complexity doesn't have to be there. But for something where we're designing, an extreme marketing system, it has some complexity to it, and we need to to reflect that in the way we design it.
Right. I agree with that. All right, and let's say something like this. So keep in mind we need to the response form ID we need to pull from the URL. So for doing that we need to use the query string token, and I think the query string ID I named RF, and I'm gonna load this in an entity named questions. Well, question makes more, we're gonna see why question makes more sense. And after that, exactly how they'll did, we are gonna use the execute actions on the entity list. And we are gonna specify that we want the entity question. And now we need to do, we're gonna use add. We're gonna search for ads. And remind me, we had text box, if I remember correctly, large text, drop down
and checkbox.
Drop down, okay. And the drop down with checkboxes, okay. All right, so for each individual, the first thing that we need to do, so these are the 4 fields that we can add. And the easiest way to let each one know. So the idea is that for each individual, let's go back a little bit here. For each individual question, we need to add the specific, we need to use the action that is specific for in this situation. So for example, we have the name, and maybe I can name this as question type name. This is gonna be a little bit more easy to use. All right, let me put this back. The idea is that we need this question type name to specify us what actions from those 4 needs to run. And before I use that, I will need to update this. This is gonna be my new column that I want. So the idea is gonna be pretty simple. So the condition on this running is gonna be that the question itself and the value of the question type name needs to be equal to text box. So in the situation, this is a text box question, we are gonna add a text box, and we can just copy this to all other actions. And here we can say large text, take this and go below again, and this is gonna be in case of the drop down. And the last one is gonna be checkbox or checkboxes. I don't remember, but I can have a look after this.
I think that's right. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to mention we didn't get a question, but we did get a comment. Radu is a rock star. I want to be him when I grow up. So carry on.
Me too.
Checkboxes. Yep.
Checkboxes. Okay, cool. Checkboxes. Cool. All right. And what we need to do right now is actually, and I'm just gonna go a little bit faster here. So the most of the actions here are the same. Have the same settings for example, the container ID needs to be the same for all of them. The field ID needs to be the question, and remember we specify field ID for each individual question. The title needs to be the question text. The description, we didn't use that. We don't have an initial value. And for past users of our technology, you can see that those are actually the settings that you can also find in a simple text box. So if I go here at the top and check a text box, it's just the same thing. The title, the ID, the show conditions, the initial value. And you can find all of them also in that specific action. The only difference is that you have the power to specify whatever you want here in those fields. And I think the last one that we need to do is the required is required. And I know I've just figured out at this moment we didn't use the is enabled feature, but I'm gonna go at the end back on that one. So let's see how can I improve filling in all of those things. So let me extend all of those checkboxes. So this is the required one. This is the required one. This is the required one. And let's take the next one. Let's take the container ID.
Yeah, they all have the same characteristics, so they just need to be built. And this is illustrating that we're doing it for 4 fields, but if we needed to add more program types, it would just be as simple as, it's not simple, but you've got to follow the details, but adding the type to the appropriate table, and then adding the add logic here, and all of a sudden you have additional types. So we can support a lot of them.
Give me 1 more minute. I'm almost done. And the only one that actually differs a little bit, I think I missed one. Sorry. The only one that is different in a way are the one that have options. In this case, the dropdowns and the checkboxes, because those themselves need to have another property in. So let's save it as it is and come back. Let's save it as it is and come back a little bit and expand only the checkbox and the dropdowns. Let's start with the dropdowns. Here, remember, exactly as a dropdown in the actual form, you can specify, you can choose the data source. So in this situation, just to make it easy, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna use the items one. And if you remember, I used a large text on defining the items. So it's just like yes and no are gonna be on different lines, exactly how the help test describes. So those are gonna just get automatically pulled in. And usually in more complex situation, I saw people specifying the actual SQL queries that they can store in the database and just add here as an option. So the only thing that I need to do is take the questions out of here and not out of there, copy it and put it also in the checkboxes. So I want to be items, right? And this is the options. And let's see how it looks right now. And something that I really enjoy doing is setting up the label top. It just looks a little bit better. So this is empty, and it's empty for a reason. It's empty because we don't have the information for rendering this, but we have this in the link that I got from the. All right, this is cool. This worked.
Rockstar.
Yep. And yes, see, we have dropdowns now have the yes or no options, exactly how you specified. And I know I have only 5 minutes left. Maybe I cannot store the results properly, but what I can show you is how you can actually how you can actually retrieve the results. And it's pretty easy to do that. Maybe I can show them in a display message or something like this. So usually what I do is utilize the entities, utilize here's let me put it in a different way. If I know how I need to generate the fields, I know what fields I have in the form, so I know how to retrieve the information from them. So in that situation, I can export the load entities actions that I have here on the init part. I can go and add it to the button. Okay, add it to the button, and it works perfectly because its only parameter is the query string that we already have. And instead, okay, and let's do another execute actions on entity list. Execute actions on entity list. And instead of the idea is that you now can save them into the database, but instead of that, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do an inject data. So inject data, you can it's basically like assignment, and I'm going to say response, well, let's say data equals to data, comma, and the response. And the response, I'm just appending comma separated values. The idea is that this response, this is actually, well, let's say this is the field. Maybe this makes more sense. So this is the field value. So to retrieve the field value, and what I'm gonna do is gonna do an apply tokens action. I'm gonna put it above my comma separated value generator, and I'm gonna say field, the variable field is actually equal to the question question field ID, and have a look what I'm actually and this needs to be tokenized twice. So have a look what I'm doing right here. I'm using double square brackets on both of the sides, because what's going to happen, and this is, keep in mind we are in an apply tokens action. What this is going to do is this first part inside of the first, the interior square brackets are going to get
the name of the field.
The name of the field, exactly. And after that, when the second tokenization gets applied, I'm going to get the value of the field. So this is a trick that that you can do. And I can just well, another thing, maybe, please El.
Yeah, could you scroll up? I don't think you set the entity on that.
That's very probable. I don't remember doing that. You're right. And also, well, if I have this, well, the name is data. Sorry, this let me just display the error message. Display. I'm just gonna do an error message because it does. I don't need to refresh the form anymore after that. And click save. And I know it's not perfect. Most likely we're gonna have some artifacts, some text that I don't want in the response. How old are you? 26. Are you married? No. More. A lot more. And I can click submit. So yeah, I know I have an artifact here, and I can show you how to remove that also. But just to be respectful of the time, this is a way to access the data. And usually what you need to do under the submit button, and maybe I will be able to do this off screen and show you in the next video. Usually, instead of using this inject data, which is concatenating values, you can just use another SQL query or a create entity or add the response somewhere, use that data and assign it to that specific client because you have the contact, sorry, that specific contact because you know the contact here from the query string.
Perfect. You did a great job in a short time. And I think we can envision where that's going to go. One of the questions that we got is about how to secure the query string IDs. And since we're right up against time, I think that'd be a good one to take up next time. We'll touch on that and then go on to our next topic. Sound good?
Yep.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think this has been brought out in the past to do also content about security. That is a big thing, and I think this makes a very, very good topic for it. So we are near the end. Thanks so much for being again with us today. We really appreciate your feedback. So there will be a feedback form coming up, and also just send us emails directly. We take any feedback that we can have to improve this webinar, deliver better content for everyone. So thanks again for being here. See you next week. We'll continue building on this marketing portal, and probably will soon be near this chapter, and we'll move towards a new system. So again, if you have ideas on what other systems you'd like to see, send us along. We haven't decided yet what we are going to build next. So have a wonderful week until next time.